This episode of Wrestling Changed My Life is brought to you by Spartan Combat. They're hosting a national tournament May 21st through the 23rd in Jacksonville, Florida. Register now at SpartanCombat.com.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestle, because if you wrestle, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
You're listening to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast presented by Spartan Combat. This is your host, Ryan Warner. Thanks for tuning in, folks. My guest today is Woody Woodburn, a two-time All-American, once for Cal State Bakersfield, another for Oklahoma State. He's since gone on to coach high school wrestling in Oklahoma for over 27 years. He's also been a staple at the J-Rob camps as an instructor there. Really enjoyed this conversation. Woody is a lot of fun, and you're going to see that right away. Fan of the Week goes to Robin Lynette out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That's Lynott. Thank you so much for the support. Greatly appreciate it. And folks, that's it. Let's get to the interview with Woody Woodburn. Peace! I got to start with this one. 1986. How in the hell did Oklahoma State pull off a third-place finish at the Nationals as a team? Because I know that year you guys were ranked in the 10 spot. You were up at 126, went down to 118. Corey got moved around a little bit. Talk about the team of 1986 and how you guys managed to pull off a trophy at the national tournament.
Well, we started off with a loss to OU. Then we lost at Northern Iowa. We were like, we went to Clarion and we lost to Clarion, lost to Penn State. I mean, we were like 0-4. We were, to say the least, we were struggling. And Leo Bailey and Luke Scove and myself, Vince Silva, Mark Van Tyne, Tom Erickson, all of us just kind of came together, and we had a guy named, I forget his name, but he came over with Tom Erickson, but we just kind of came together. Some things fell together, the right places. Leo, we ended up with 7 All-Americans. The lowest finish was, I believe, 7th. Mm-hmm. Everywhere from a runner-up to 7th place. So, I mean, I think the team just started to jive together, and we brought in Gary Keck as one of our assistants at the time, and he brought in that Iowa style and that mentality because he had been training at the Hawkeye Club. Mm-hmm. And I think there was just some passion that was born, and we got on a roll, and I think it was just kind of like the Minnesota, the 10, we just got on a roll.
And like even late into the year, I was looking at an old article today. You guys lost to Iowa State, and you were battling Billy Kelly up at 126. But like Corey lost that duel. You ended up losing that match. And like Iowa State kind of, won that duel. But then I'm like, shit, look at the Nationals. Again, 3rd place as a team. And, Joe C was kind of in the hot seat because everyone loved Chesbro, and he was coming in as this outsider. And so would you say you guys were pulling together for him or for yourselves as much as anything?
I think we were just being selfish, and we decided that we didn't want this. And we had our ins and outs with Joe, and there were some faithfuls of Tommy, and I think we just became selfish, and right things clicked. We started backing each other, and we were at each other's throats most of the year, and we just decided to come together. And to this day, we are probably one of the closest teams I've ever had the honor to be a part of.
Wow. Why did you go down to 118, and what happened to Corey at the end of that year?
I came in as a 118 pounder. I didn't come in as a 26 pounder. But we didn't have anybody at 26. And who we did have, he wasn't doing his job. So Corey and I battled back and forth. I'd go in at 18 sometimes, he'd go in at 18. And then came down to a ranking match. I won the spot. I ended up going to nationals at 118. He had to step up and go 126. So, and then my next year, Kendall came into the picture. And they tried to make me a 126 pounder and put Corey in at 118. But then again, I wasn't a 26 pounder. I believed in my more of 118. So I went back down again, but injury took its toll on me at the end of the year.
Man, how incredible is it that John wasn't persuaded into coming out of redshirt, knowing that you guys were struggling like that, and the 126 pounder wasn't getting it done? I know John ended up going up to 34 later in his career, but was there pressure for him to come out of that red shirt?
There was talk about it. I mean, there was discussion. I had heard in the rumbles, but as far as I think you have to understand, John did what John wanted to do, and John said, "I don't want to come out of red shirt." And basically, John didn't come out of red shirt. It's just the way it is.
Man, what was the dynamic in the room like that year? Who was running the practices, and who was kind of like the main guy who all the guys gravitated towards? You mentioned Coach Keck, but was there anyone else in there?
Well, Byron would come around, and Coach Chesborough always sat in his famous chair right there between the showers in the dungeon. And Joe just let Tommy sit there, and he would say things to different guys. And then Keck came in, and then you'd have Mike Sheets, and you'd have Kenny Monday coming in. And so, I mean, it was a who's who. And Joe is always, and I've always referred to Joe C as this. He's in baseball, and what we call baseball, he's a player's coach. And he was a wrestler's coach because he let us do our own thing. He didn't say, okay, this is the style you're going to wrestle, and I'm going to force this on you. And I had been with him since Bakersfield.
Oh, really?
So, yes, I was recruited to Cal State Bakersfield. I spent 3 years at Cal State Bakersfield before I transferred to
So
OSU.
Were you an Oklahoma high school guy?
No, I was born and raised in Southern California. And when I was a sophomore, I moved to Oregon. I won 2 state titles in Oregon. And that's a whole nother story in itself. But then I got recruited to Cal State Bakersfield. I spent 2.5 years in the room with Joe Gonzalez, Danny Questas, Adam Questas, Tim Vandy, John Azevedo, Jesse Reyes. I couldn't buy a takedown to save my life.
Dude, those guys were Joe Gonzalez and Azevedo. I mean, those guys are two of the better lightweights of that era. I mean,
to this day, Gonzo, he's my mentor, and he refers to me as his mijo, which in Spanish is my boy. And he sat actually at the NCAAs in '96, my junior year. He sat in my corner from the second match on all the way through till I wrestled for 5th and 6th. Joe, he was at Arizona. Gonzo was at Arizona State, and Joe said, "You know him better than anybody," and he let Gonzo sit with me from then on in every one of my matches after the second match.
That's why Joe C is so unique. Who would do that? Who would give up that? Like, he didn't have an ego in that sense. And
no, Gary Keck was in the corner, and Joe Gonzalez, and they coached through.
Could you imagine that happening now?
Hell, there's some coaches out there that I believe would let it get done.
But other teams, though, it just seems so weird to me. That's crazy.
I mean, because Zeke Jones wasn't in the picture yet. I think he was redshirting. And so, Gonzo had a connection with me. And I don't know if I said something to Joe C or if Gonzo said something to Joe C, but somehow it just worked out where Gonzo sat in my corner from my second match on all the way through till I wrestled, like I said, for 5th and 6th.
Wow. What was it about Azevedo that made him so good?
He was a master of the sport. Gonzo was good on his feet. So was John Azevedo. But, he was so slick. You just couldn't, I went to Japan and trained for 3 months. I got there through Gonzo, and I wrestled with some of the best in the world, 2-time Olympic champions. And I was coming in as a World Cup medalist, as an All-American. I felt like I had never even wrestled before. And that's what was, when you wrestled Azevedo, it was like he just made you feel like you were stupid.
Wow.
Slick. Gonzo, to this day, in all the years I practiced with Gonzo, I've competed in competition against him. I've scored 1 takedown in my whole life against him. And he tells me all the time, and because he would like to rub it in my face, he goes, only reason you scored that takedown is because I was beating you 12-1, and I just gave you that takedown.
Oh, Gonzo is one of those guys. I've had him on the show. The fact that he went through high school with the injuries he did because his family couldn't afford the medical bills, and then almost didn't even wrestle in college is pretty incredible. I mean, and he pioneered that trip to Japan. He went over there in like 79, 77 and lived with the Japanese for at least a couple weeks.
Yeah, and I went over there for 3 months.
Wow. And Tell me about that. Like, what was the day in the life like when you were over there?
Well, I got the connection through Gonzo. Tomiyama was there, and I just kind of found a niche. And Obata was over there, who we had Oklahoma State ties with, and I trained for 3 months there. And I was stuck in the weight class between 52 kilos, which is 114 and a half, or 48 kilos, which is 105 and a half. I was kind of small for 14, but I was too big for 5. Well, I went over there and I trained and I put my heart into it, and I liked it. I mean, I kind of, I enjoyed it to a point where I wanted to go back if there was ever a chance, just for a vacation. I'd have to go back there and train. But I came back and wrestled in the Sunkist Open and got first at 50 kilos, which is 110 pounds. I could make the 110. It was that other 2 kilos that was killing me. That extra, I get to 110, I was fine. That other 4.5 pounds was like, it was like filleting a fish. It was just coming off. I don't know how it was going to come off. And then I made the World Cup team and went to Mongolia, and I got dysentery while I was there. And I said goodbye to 105. I said, I'm not doing this anymore.
How many times did you actually make the cut to 105 after college?
1, 2, 3, 4. 1 for the Sunkist Open, 1 would be 2 for the World Cup. So that's 3. And then the 80, the 92 trials, 4 times. I tried to make the cut, and I only had to make 110, 3 of those 4 times. On the Olympic trials, I gave up my number 3 seed and went to try to change weight classes to make the team. And I got to 107, and my body said no more.
It was that hard of a cut, huh?
Well, I started at 145.
Woody Woodburn, stop it. That's crazy. My God.
I was a weight cutting fool.
God. And I heard that Mark Perry was the weight cutting master, man. So you're probably taking the spot there.
Yeah, I wouldn't know about that, but I even in high school, I mean, the lowest weight class was 98 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
I did. Mm-hmm. My senior year, I'm returning undefeated state champion at 98. I told my coach, I said, I'm going to go, I think it's 106 back then, or 108. He said, no, for the team to win a title, you need to go back down to 98. And I went, holy cow. So I pulled from 120 to 100 to back down to 98 pounds.
Man, how'd you get in the sport initially? Like, walk us through your introduction to wrestling.
It was an accident. I started wrestling as a freshman. I was little. I weighed 85 pounds as a freshman in high school. I had played some organized sports, football, baseball, but I was big into the X Games. I was a big motocross racer, surfer, skateboarder. Well, I didn't even put it all together until I got older. But all of those sports are the same thing as wrestling. They're individual sports. Mm. And while I was learning these sports, especially like motocross and surfing and skateboarding, I'm learning body kinesthetics. I'm learning how to fall and kind of like gymnastics. And I I got into wrestling. I came out as a freshman. I made the varsity in California. I think I lost 3 matches that year, but I did well. And then I moved to Oregon as a sophomore. And then I met my head coach there, Verl Miller, and life just, he changed the scope of what my wrestling was all about.
Why do you say that?
It was a phone call I made to him one time. I moved to La Grande, Oregon, up in the Boise Cascade Mountains. And I was undefeated as a 98-pound junior. Well, his son, Little Verl, was also at 98s and was challenging me for the spot as varsity. And I was undefeated. Well, I lost the first match. So now I win the second match. Now we got to come back on Saturday and wrestle the rubber match for who's going to be the starter. And I went home. I had a pretty ornery dad who said, I can't believe you're undefeated and you can't even beat this freshman. And how are you going to do it? So I said to myself, I said, I'm done. I quit. And I called Verl, my high school coach, and I said, I quit. I'm done. I'm not coming back tomorrow. I'm not going to make weight. I'm not going to rank your son. He can have the spot. And Verl said, no, you're going to come back. You're going to rank Little Verl, and you're going to see what you can do. I beat him 5-2. I got my varsity spot back. I went on to win the state title. I beat his son in the state finals because in Oregon, you can take junior varsity and varsity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can take junior varsity and varsity if they qualify through regionals.
So he was that good where he was second best in the state.
Yes. I beat him 5-2 that Saturday. Then we go to regionals. I beat him in the finals of regionals 5-2. We go to the state tournament. We're on opposite sides of the bracket. We both make it to the finals. I beat him 5-2. 3 times 5-2. That changed my life. That phone call that night to my high school coach when I said I was going to quit, and he said, no, you're going to come in, you're going to rank, changed the scope of my whole life, because now I started thinking about, maybe I got a chance I can do something. I had Oregon States, Boise States looking at me, but I had my eye on the prize, and that was Cal State Bakersfield.
How come you went there over like a Portland State where they had a pretty good program?
We were originally from California to begin with, and my dad moved basically to help me get better at wrestling. When I graduated, he was moving back to California. So I said, and Bakersfield was known. It's so funny. You had the likes of Joe Gonzalez. You had the likes of Danny Cuestas, Adam Cuestas, John Azevedo. You had all these Mexicans wrestling at Cal State Bakersfield. And then here comes this little blonde-haired, toe-head white boy, Eddie Woodburn. And Gonzo made a joke about it. He goes, shit, there goes the neighborhood. A white boy wrestling where we should have a Mexican. And so I just had my eye on that prize. And then Joe left and went to Oklahoma State, and I just followed him.
Was it big news when you guys were at the Bakersfield room? And I feel like you guys probably had like a chip on your shoulder because you're this Division II powerhouse, but you're going to the D1s and dominating. So what was the reaction when people said that, Joe was leaving? Did he come in and tell you guys, or how did it happen?
Well, the first question that came out of most everybody's mind was who's going to be our next coach. And that made the decision whether or not some people stayed and some people left. Mm-hmm. Well, Joe left and he took Jesse Reyes with him. Joe Gonzalez and Tim Vanny went to Arizona State. Adam and Danny Cuestas moved on with their lives. And so and John Azevedo, I think, moved over to Cal Poly. I was left all by myself. And I was like, now who am I going to work out with? Who am I going to train with? How am I going to get better? And I stayed for a year with TJ Kerr. I stayed for a year with him. I ended up 5th in the Division IIs. And then the next year, which was my junior year, I wanted to go to Arizona State, ironically, because I wanted to be with Gonzo. Mm-hmm. And Bobby Douglas, I went on a recruiting trip, and Bobby Douglas didn't have any scholarship for me. He had Parks, he had Zeke, and just didn't have any aid. And so Joe was going to give me some aid and go to Oklahoma State. And so I came to Oklahoma State in 85, and here we are in 2021, and I'm still here.
I was going to ask you, I read a press headline that maybe you went to Florida for a year or two. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I was going to. I got cold feet.
Yeah. I said, that's a big move, man.
I've been coaching high school for 27 years, and I was gonna, I was tired of the pay cut that we weren't making, and I was divorced. My sons were grown, and I was like, yeah, I got nothing holding me here. And then I did have something holding me here, my 3 sons, and my best friend Doug Chesborough, which is the middle son to Tommy. And so I just jumped ship and said, it was kind of funny. I put a down payment on a house and everything, and I called the athletic director probably a month after I finished up my J-Rob camps, and I said, I just can't do it. I just can't do it.
Yep, I hear you. Tell me, the J-Rob camp is something I found as well. Tell me about your first experience. Were you a camper?
Nope, I never went to J-Rob as an athlete. About 95-ish, 96, I went and did some technique camps with Jay. And I had known Jay. He was originally from California, San Diego. He also wrestled at Oklahoma State. And I had known him. He was friends with Gary Keck. And so we had a friendship, and we had developed. And he brought me in, and I started doing some technique camps, and then he moved me to some intensive camps, and I was still competing. So I used it as a training method. And here I am now, which COVID shut us down last year. Here I am now, almost 27 years into doing J-Rob. I'm like a figurehead. Just, everybody likes to say, what do you know when Woody's in town? They say, because you're going back to one. And it's just the same because,
what's going back to one mean?
Oh, it's a drill I do with the kids that I make them do push-ups. And if they do, and if I say down and my arm doesn't go down, we go back to one. And so we call it back to one. And they've coined the phrase, and I'm, I've just been a part, and I've seen All-Americans, national champs. I've seen kids that have come through the program that are now wrestling Division 1, so.
You're a staple there, huh?
Yeah. J-Rob's, I talk to Jay maybe once a month, and, we're hoping that we can have this year's summer camps, but we don't know.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I've had him on, and man, what a legend. I mean, that guy, he's seen so much. I mean, going to Vietnam, being in the Olympics in 72 for Greco, driving to Iowa City. And, he was a big part of the reason Iowa started their run. And obviously what he did at Minnesota, incredible,
Well, I here in the last 7 to 10 years, I make a joke about it. I said, hey, when you walk in the dorms, if you don't want to have to spend the next hour and a half sitting in Jay's room, talking to Jay and explaining either why you did this or you didn't do this, you need to avoid his room, because I'll walk by and he'll go, Woody, hey, I need to talk to you. And then an hour and a half later, I'm like, okay, now, and we used to, now that Jay's gotten older and he's had so many knee surgeries, we used to call it, Code Red when Jay was in the building. So if you weren't doing what you were supposed to, everybody yelled Code Red, and everybody knew, oh, Jay's in the building, start doing it. Well, now I started teasing Jay. I said, we used to call Code Red when you walked into Bierman at Minnesota. I said, now we call Code Red when you get to the parking lot, because we know it's going to take that long.
That's hilarious. He, man, I can't believe he's still doing those camps. I mean, it's just insane to me. And really how he all went to Minnesota is because they were pushing him too hard at Iowa in the 80s, and some kid collapsed on the hill, and that's what, got him to leave Iowa and go to Minnesota. And, lucky for the wrestling world, because I think it's better when there's more power programs, and now Minnesota still is.
Well, there's so much more parity in the Division I. I mean, you're talking of the likes of Rutgers, having 2 national champs here recently, right. Missouri, I mean, they used to be, at the bottom of the Big 8, as we called it, but now they're, at the top of the whatever they're in, the ACC or SEC.
You look at that. You look at Cornell, North Carolina State. I just had Pat Papalizio on the show. They're incredible. I mean, it's awesome.
you know, and my son wrestled for the University of Wyoming in Mark Branch.
The man. I
And
love
so-
Mark Branch.
And, you know, and I actually taught and coached at Mark Branch's old high school, Newkirk. And he'd come back and I'd always want to, you know, we'd always practice in what we call the Mark Branch Field House. And so, you know, and if you look around, I don't know, besides John, to be honest with you, I don't know how many other coaches can actually say how many head coaches they have at different schools throughout the Division I rankings. You got Pendleton. You got UNC.
Coleman Scott, Pat
Scott.
Papalizio,
You got
Kevin Ward.
You got Ward. You got Branch. I mean, now Ethan Kyle is now at Stillwater High School. He left Wyoming and he's now then you had Eric Guerrero in there. And so, I mean, there's just
Incredible.
John's legacy will definitely, it'll stay where it's at.
It's incredible because most of the coaches do statistically than a lot of Gable's guys who went on.
I always say that most of the Gable's guys usually were so worn out and didn't have a body left that they just kind of went away.
You're right, though. I mean, the legacy is huge. I mean, even Little Rock, Arkansas, and Pat Smith's legacy there is incredible just in itself.
You mentioned about how Gable. You had Barry Davis and you had
Dwayne
Sherritt.
Goldman.
Yeah, Dwayne Goldman. Bannock's never did, but everybody says it must be a treat to wrestle for Gable. And I remember one time in the World Cup, we were getting ready to wrestle the Russians, and for the finals, and we had the likes of Tim Vanny at one weight, and then I was at 14. Then we had Fisher, and we had Penrith, and we had the brothers and Baumgartner and John. And Gable goes through every weight class, tells us what we need to do and how you needed to wrestle your opponent. And I had a returning world champ. And Gable gets to my weight and he goes, "Woody, I need you to score a point." I said, "A point?" I said, "You're not going to give me any other thing I need to do." He goes, "If you score a point, the team gets 1 point because freestyle, 3-1. I said, "That's all?" He goes, "Yeah, that's all I got for you." Well, at intermission, I'm ahead 7-4, and he goes, I said, "Do I need to still score a point?" He goes, "No, now you need to goddamn win." Okay. And so, and it was funny is the night before, Gable had told me, he said, "Hey, I want you to run 5 hills tomorrow after practice." I said, "Okay." So I ran 5 hills, and I went over to the Pizza Hut to get some pasta, and I saw Coach sitting there by himself, and he was so intimidating. You just didn't even want to, to me, he was.
Even on the world team, you're thinking he's intimidating?
Yes. I'm intimidated. I'm not going to stop and say hello. I'm not going to try to sit at his booth with him. The man was like, he was untouchable. And I walked by him and he put his hand up and he goes, "Did you run those 5 hills today?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Only 5? I said, "Well, that's how many you said." He goes, "How many do you think that Russian ran?" I go, "I got you." I went back, put my pasta in the fridge, put my sweats on, and went and ran more hills.
That's like his magic. He says a word or two and can get under your skin like that. I know you don't have much time because of your
Let me see what time. Yeah, my 6th graders are getting ready to come back in.
We got it. We're catching Mr. Woodburn here during his study hall, but I want to ask you this. You said earlier that your dad was probably too hard on you. And I know your son was a multiple-time state champion. Was it Claremore High School?
Yes, at Claremore.
I just wanted to ask you, and if they're coming in now, we can cut this short.
No. I keep my door shut so they know not to come in unless I open the door.
Let's wind down with this. How would you describe your coaching philosophy, and how'd you do it different than your dad did to you?
My coaching philosophy, I've taken some from Joe C., which is being a player's coach. I've taken some from Tommy Chesborough, which is don't bite your nose off to spite your face. Don't kick a kid off just because he doesn't do what you want him to do. He may not work within the scope of right now. Mm-hmm. I took a little bit from Dan Gable. the physicality. We may not be the most technical, but we're going to be the best in shape. And then I've taken some from J-Rob, which is the deep, finding the inner passion within yourself. You know, I always say this, and I've told my sons this, and I've told my athletes this. When you step in that circle, there's one thing you have to do, and there's only one thing, and that's turn the light switch on. Because when you walk in a room and it's dark, what's the first thing you do? Turn on the light switch. When you step in that circle, the first thing you need to do is turn on the light switch. And, you know, wrestling is such a humble sport. You know, it's brought me to tears. I remember the years at Bakersfield. I don't know how many times I went to the outside sauna, Gonzo following behind me, calling me every little word that you could come up with that wasn't very nice. And he goes, "So are you going to quit?" And I said, "Yeah, quit." And about 10 seconds later, I'm back in there. I'm like, "All right, let's go." So, you know, it's a humbling sport. And, you know, like somebody asked me about this podcast, and I told him, I said, you know, I've seen the host of people that have been on this. And I said, and the famous words of whatever that movie is, but I'm not worthy. I'm just not. I don't. You know, I had a decent college career. You know, I wish I could have finished with a 3-time All-American, but I got hurt my senior year. I wish I could have made an Olympic team, but I made 3 World Cup teams.
Right.
You know, I got to go to Tbilisi. I got to go to Mongolia. I got to travel the world. I lived in Switzerland for a year. You know, so I had fun. The sport, you know, it changed my life because now I get to give back to my students what wrestling gave to me.
Exactly. That's the cool part about it. And I know we could talk for hours about your coaching because like you said, you've been at the high school level, the grassroots level, coaching for 25 plus years. And hopefully we can revisit that someday. Mr. Woodburn, thank you for your time, sir. I greatly appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Ryan. Thank you.
That's the end of this episode. Thank you to our sponsor, Spartan Combat. Please go to SpartanCombat.com to register for their national tournament taking place May 21st through the 23rd in Jacksonville, Florida. To see video clips of this interview, go to Wrestling Changed My Life on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. We'll see you next time.